Hi, this is Dorothy. It is March the 26th, 4:20 something in the afternoon, and I wanted to do a quick recording to give people a little more detail around the most recent sprint release for Axon, WW1. And so I'm going to go through some slides, and then we'll actually go into Axon real quick and look at a couple of things just to make sure that everyone's clear. And so we're going to try to do these little release recordings each time we have a sprint release. This one is for work that was finished on March the 15th. That work moved into the sandbox on March the 19th. Testing and regression testing was the week of the 19th. And then our goal was to have this to go live on March the 26th, and it is going live as we speak. So you may be aware that we name our sprints with a number and a letter or letters, and then we also give them a little mascot. So the mascot for this sprint was the spiny weaver. It's actually a little spider, but we also give them a little metaphor. So the bite of the spiny weaver may be harmless, but the bite of bugs is not, and the bite of GDPR is also not a harmless thing. So we're trying to work through lots of things to make sure that, one, we're GDPR compliant, and then we had a couple of other little things that we worked on. So highlights for this sprint, lots of GDPR stories. We'll look at those in detail in just a second. And then we had a completion email that we changed up, and I'll show you that in detail too. So next we have the list of stories, and you'll notice I've put in a header or a intro to each one of these story names, and so you'll see lots of GDPR. We're getting really close to finalizing everything that we need for global data privacy regulations. We removed old 9.3 database from all our servers. We have deleted the thinker's email address from initiatives once the invitation is created. And some of these stories you'll notice in the GDPR realm are going to be things around getting rid of unnecessary or temporary data. So when we create initiatives, we put in the thinker's email address, but we don't need that after the initiative has been created and then the invitation has created. If you don't know about initiatives, that's a great little process that helps us send out many invitations to many thinkers basically at the same time. So it helps you upload lots of information. If you don't know about that and want to know more, take a look at the admin guide or just reach out and let us know if that's something that you're interested in. Blanking out the email column on seats once the user starts an invitation, another one of those places where we put data in that needs to be there for a short period of time but doesn't need to be there forever. And then creating a data deletion background job responsible for deleting tables where we have a defined limited retention policy. So if we have things that we can say we only need to keep this data for a limited amount of time, we need to be able to have a background job that will get rid of it at that point. When an assessment is submitted, we can remove all the partial answers from the assessment. And that would be maybe a good example of that might be when someone completes the hobbies section, but they don't get to the ranking of that hobby and they stop. That process actually puts in temporary data and says this person has selected these hobbies. And then once they come back to the assessment and rank those hobbies, we don't need the selection anymore because the ranking includes the selection. So anytime we have those places in the assessment where we have partial answers, we would remove that once the assessment is submitted. And then we've got some edits that we have to the sharing with a practitioner feature. I'll show you that in a moment. I've got a special slide for that. We did a spike to talk about and look at what it would take to migrate to JSON-B columns on our assessments. That's actually going to help with performance, and it helps us to get ready for some additional database cleanup. We created a tool to allow a support team member to answer the question from a thinker, which organizations can see this user's data. We'll look at that in a minute with a special slide. Ensure that our GDPR-related actions remove data from the ops database. Again, anytime we have data that is in the database and we don't need it for long periods of time, then that needs to go away for GDPR compliance. We don't need to keep any data that we don't have a reason to keep. So that is kind of the circle of that story. Then we do have a story that is called Create Your Data Article in Zendesk. We'll see that in a second, and there will be a link in the slides. So if you need to see that article, you can link from here or from the slides themselves. We had a little problem with one of the sections in the survey where capitalization wasn't behaving the way it was, so we've got that corrected. We did change the link in the completion email. When a thinker completes the assessment, they get an email that says, "Thank you for submitting your completed assessment," and it points them to an e-learning if they were invited to complete that. And before, it sent them directly to the e-learning. And now we're going to change that up, so I'll show you that in a moment. We had a problem with the gradient on the reports for pair reports for the average and the under pressure comparison. That was a bug that we get corrected. And then finally, we've got a story that was to improve the integer handling of the operations API for NetSuite integration. So we'll look at some specific stories. So first thing is when a thinker shares their HBDI with the practitioner, and this is a function that is already available in Axon. So a thinker can go to their journey page, and they have listed any assessments that they have completed, and they would have the opportunity there to share. And by clicking that share link, it opens up the box that says, "Please add the email addresses of the practitioners you would like to share your assessment results with. Please note that the practitioners may make your results accessible to additional practitioners and others as described in Herman's privacy policy." So the text is a little different. The link to the privacy policy is available in the box, so if they're concerned about any of the sharing of that data, they can find out what the privacy policy says about that. And then they simply type in the email address of the practitioner they want to share that assessment with, and they click Share Assessment. Then, if you're not familiar with this process, just to touch base on that just a quick second, the practitioner then receives an email that says, for example, "Dorothy has shared her HBDI with you." They click on a link in that email, log into Axon, and then they are taken to a page where they determine what data role they should place that shared assessment. So if, for example, you're a practitioner and you have multiple data roles, you may be a reseller, for example, and have several clients and several different data roles, and you want to say, "Dorothy has shared her profile with me. I want to put that in the Herman data role." And so you as the practitioner have the ability to determine where that goes. Again, this is one of those features where we have that laid out in the admin guide. So if you have questions about that, just take a look there. This is just new text and then a new link. Next, we have the story that we mentioned earlier, that a completion email link goes to the journey page instead of directly to fundamentals, and then the thinker must log in. This is again that email that comes to you, a thinker, and says, "Congratulations, you've completed the HBDI and we've received it." And then in that, if they have been invited to complete a e-learning, the link before sent them straight to fundamentals, for example. by doing so, that thinker didn't have to log back in, and by doing so, the thinker's progress was not tracked. So we have decided to change that link and link it to this page, the journey page currently. And then once they're in the journey page, they would see the e-learnings listed that they have options for, and they can either begin or continue that e-learning. And because they logged in, their progress is tracked. So that's what that story's about. This is the story where we have a new article in Zendesk. It's the titled Your Data at Herman, and it has sections in it. For example, what data do we store? Who has access to this data? How is my data used? And so included in the slides, which we'll make available to you, there is a link to that article, and you can share that article with thinkers that ask you questions about that. Another specific story was that we had a little problem with the gradient in these two reports, in our pair reports. For whatever strange reason, the gradient was actually misplaced, and so the highlighted area that's in the center of the profile was actually over in the A quadrant. Those have been corrected, thank goodness. So that's a quick story, but an important one. And then we have added a tool for security and privacy admins to have access to answer the question from a thinker, who can see my data? So what happens through GDPR compliance, lots of things, but one of the questions that a thinker must be able to ask and be answered is, who sees their data? So we have this new link, and we can get to that by going to the security and privacy tab in a thinker's information or a user's information. So we go to their user account, and then we click on who could you see this user's data, and it opens up a page that looks like this. It has the thinker's user or metadata, so their email address when they signed in, their last name, first name, gender if they've included it, company name, phone number, all those kinds of user information. And then it also has the assessments listed, and underneath those assessments you can also click on who can see this data. So underneath each assessment you would be able to see what organizations and what parent organizations have access to that data. And we can answer that question for a thinker by reviewing this report and then making that report available to them. So they would still need to log into Axon, and they would then be able to access this report because an admin had given them access to it. This is not something that they would be able to pull themselves, but it is something that we could make available to them. So another GDPR compliance story, and that concludes what we have in the current, or this WW1 sprint. So we'll look at WW2 really quickly. This sprint is ending on March the 29th, which is just a couple of days from now. Should go to the sandbox on March the 30th, and our goal is to have these sets of stories into production by April 2nd. In this sprint, there will be some little bugs that we've determined need to be fixed, and then final GDPR stories. And we have begun the work to develop the Thinker homepage. So just as we saw a few moments ago, let me bounce back to that page. This My Journey page, the Thinker homepage will become the replacement for this Journey page. It is likely that the URL will stay the same, but the look and feel and all the things that you can do as a thinker will change drastically. So we will be making edits to the Thinker homepage, and you'll see more about that in the coming weeks, but we wanted to let you know that that's coming. One last quick update. Lots of questions about languages, so I want to go through this really quickly. We have these languages available now in Axon: Danish, German, US English, UK or International English, Spanish, Finnish, French, Japanese, Dutch, Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, if that is new, it was not in the HTMS, Swedish, Chinese Simplified, Chinese Traditional, and as of tomorrow, we will have Italian available in Axon. These languages represent over 99% of the assessments that are completed in the global HTMS data. So if you see a language that you're concerned about that is not there, it is going to be much less than 1% of the population that we have so far. Not to say that we're not going to do those, so we'll look at what's coming next. In the month of April, it is intended that we will work on Korean and finish that up. There are several steps in order to do that. Korean represents less than 1% of the HTMS database. Then Polish comes next, and we are working to verify that it matches in the HTMS, that it is has the final proofs and additions from a new translation company that we're going to start using called G3 Translate, and Polish represents less than 1% of the database. And then Arabic is one where we have several steps in this to make it available, but the goal is to have it launch on May 3rd. And what takes to do this is we need to flip pages so that they are read from right to left rather than left to right. We want to verify and make sure that it matches the HTMS Arabic survey, and then we will have G3 Translate final proof and additions. We cannot mine the number of Arabic surveys in the HTMS for whatever reason, so I can't tell you what percentage of the database it is, but it's less than 1%. And then we have others. So Greek, Romanian, Croatian, Hungarian, and Slovenian. Those are the ones that we lack at this point that are in the HTMS. What it takes to get these into Axon is basically verifying that Axon matches the HTMS, and then having G3 Translate do a review and add any Axon specific text, and then we will have those proofed and get those in there. It is our estimate and our goal that we would have those launched by May 30th. Finally, Turkish, Russian, and Czechoslovakian. And these are languages that are currently only available on paper. So these are not even available in the HTMS, but it is our intention that we'll go ahead and add these. What it takes to do those is hand entry from paper surveys, again verifying that Axon matches what is on paper, and then G3 translates the remaining text that isn't represented on paper and review, and then do final proofs. So that's a quick translation update of what will be coming soon for the HBDI translations. And that's the end of our update for WW1. Thank you.